Hi, I'm Tova with Professor Pincushion. Today I'm going to show you how to add sleeve bands to your knit sleeves. The sleeve band, also known as a rib knit cuff, is a great way to finish the bottom of your sleeves instead of a traditional hem. You'll typically see these on sweatshirts, but you can add them to other types of knit garments as well. Even if you don't have a pattern, you can easily create one yourself. Let's go ahead and get started. If you're using a pattern in order to create your sleeve band, then that's great. But if you don't have a pattern and you want to add one, you can definitely recreate your own pattern. You can see mine is basically a rectangle. So in order to get the measurements for your pattern, you're going to do the following steps. You're going to measure the length of the bottom of your sleeve. And this line is actually 85% of this line. So take this length, times it by 0.85, and that's going to give you the length of this line here. Next, we're going to need this line. So it's going to be double whatever you want the finished width of your band to be. So let's say I want my finished width of my finished band to be 2 inches. So I'm going to make the whole thing 4 inches. Now don't forget, to this line, you're also going to add your seam allowance. So if you're having a 1/2 inch seam allowance, you're going to add an extra inch. That would make this line 5 inches. It's very important how you lay your pattern onto your fabric. My grain line is going parallel with my selvage. If you created your own pattern, your grain line is going to go parallel with the height. So this is where we took the finished height and we doubled it, so it's going parallel with that edge. I'm using ribbed knit fabric. You don't have to use ribbed knit, but that's traditionally what is used when making these types of bands or cuffs. And you can see that the line of the ribbed is also going parallel with the grain line. So if this was my fabric that I cut out of this pattern and it was going like this, we're eventually going to fold it in half. So when it gets put onto our sleeve, you can see that the rib lines are going up and down my arm instead of going this way. You're going to take the 2 short ends and you're going to bring them together like this, right side to right side. And you can go ahead and pin this edge. This seam is going to be whatever my seam allowance was for my sleeve. So in my case, I'm doing it at 5/8 of an inch, and I'm just doing a straight stitch. Don't forget to do your back stitching at the beginning and end. Now I have a tube of my ribbed knit. I pressed my seams open. It's still raw inside out, and you can see it's just a circle. I'm going to take one edge, let's say this bottom edge, and I'm going to bring it up to the top edge by folding this thing in half. So I'm taking this bottom edge, bringing it up to meet with this top part right here. So you'll end up with that tube in half. Now you can see it's right side out. So here's my seam line here. We don't see our seam allowance anymore. I'm going to pin this top raw edge together so it just holds it. And I can actually slip it onto my arm, and you can see it now. It looks like a cuff. But for now, just go ahead and pin this whole top edge. If you want to go ahead and press this bottom folded part, you can. Sew the top raw edge of your band with a zigzag stitch. See, I'm just getting right on the top here. And this is a little bit tricky. Now, I'm not stretching my fabric at all. You just want it to lay flat as it's going through the machine. But because we're dealing with just a small tube here, I can't exactly slip it onto my base. So I'm just taking this bottom edge and I'm just kind of pulling it out of the way as I'm going around the whole top edge. And you just keep checking to make sure that you're not accidentally stitching another part, because obviously we don't want to sew our band closed. We just want to kind of hold this raw edge together just so it makes it easier when we're attaching it to the bottom of our sleeve. So that's why we're doing this. Now we can start pinning our band to the bottom of our sleeve. But before I do that, I'm going to take the bottom of my sleeve and I'm going to divide it into 4ths. So I'm just going to put a pin here at my seam line. I'm going to divide this in half, and then I'm going to put a pin in the middle of each of those two sections. So here and then on the other side. Now I have a notch here to kind of help me with placement, but even if you don't have any sort of notches or marks, it's fine. As long as you divide it into 4 so we can put everything on evenly, then that's the main thing. So I'm going to do this with my sleeve, and I'm going to do the same thing with my cuff, so it gives us something to match up as we're trying to put the two together, since obviously the bottom of the sleeve is a little bit bigger than our cuff. Slip your sleeve band onto the bottom edge of your sleeve. Now my sleeve is right side out, and I'm matching up my seam line of my cuff with the seam line of my sleeve. So that's where I have my first pin. So I can go ahead and bring these raw edges together of the band and the sleeve and pin. And then I'm just going to go around, and I'm going to find my next pins. So I have some pins right here. So now I'm going to pin this together. The sleeve is probably going to be gathered inside the cuff, which is fine. But you can see there's a little bit of a gap here. So as we're sewing this onto the bottom of the sleeve, we're going to be stretching just enough to make the cuff or the sleeve band fit the bottom of the sleeve. You don't want to be stretching so much that you're actually stretching the sleeve fabric. We want that to lay flat. So I'm just going to be pulling it a little bit just so the band matches the sleeve. And if you want to add a little bit more pins, you can to help. So I can just pull this a little bit and then add a pin in the middle, just so I'm stretching less in between and I'm not doing a huge piece. So now I'm going to go to this other section. So now I have a pin here and a pin here. I'm going to match these, and you can see there's a gap there. So as I'm sewing it, I'm just going to pull it just a little bit so the rib knit is matching that same length. So this is going to make it more fitted once we finish sewing this. So once I have my major points pinned, I'm going to go ahead, take it to my machine, and you're going to do whatever your seam allowance is. So it should be, it's not going to be on the edge, but it should be whatever your normal seam allowance is for your pattern. So I'm going to do 5/8 of an inch. And again, I'm going to do a zigzag stitch because we want to make sure that this is going to be able to stretch in order to get onto our arm. I'm still having to sort of tuck up or fold up the other side of the sleeve as I'm sewing this part, because again, we don't want to accidentally sew our sleeve shut. So I'm always checking to make sure that's out of the way. And I'm doing that zigzag stitch. And I'm just, again, stretching enough to make that band fit the sleeve. If you stretch the sleeve fabric, you might actually create it so it looks kind of puckered or gathered. That's why we don't want to stretch that. So I'm just going all the way around. The next step would be to trim most of your seam allowance off. Because this fabric doesn't fray, you can actually trim really close to your seam that you just created. So this is my zigzag stitch. I would trim right above that, all this cutting it off. Before I actually do that though, I'm going to actually pull this out, and I'm going to inspect the seam line to make sure I don't have any weird creases or puckers or anything like that. So if it looks good, you can go ahead and trim that seam allowance off. At this point, our sleeve band is pretty much complete. With your seam allowance trim, you want to make sure that it's going up towards the sleeve, so it's all being pressed in that direction, and it's lying right underneath this portion. In order to keep it there as an option, you don't have to, but as an option, looking at the right side, you can do another zigzag stitch right on top there, and that's going to make it stretchy and make it kind of decorative as well. You just want to make sure if you do that, you don't stretch your fabric as you're sewing it. Otherwise, you might get a slight wavy look to your sleeve, and you don't want that. Now that you know how to sew a sleeve band, you'll have no problems adding some interest to some of your knit garments. We hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please subscribe to get notified of our weekly releases. Also check out ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 350 sewing tutorials. If you would like to directly support us, you can check out our Patreon campaign and earn some exclusive perks. Thanks for watching.